my name is Aditi Kumar, and I have recently completed my PhD in Visual Arts from School of Arts and Aesthetics, New Delhi, JNU. That stands for Jawaharlal Nehru University. And my thesis, as you can see, is titled Memorializing Displacement, Images, Objects, and Visual Histories of the Contested Regions of Jammu and Kashmir. So this photograph is a part of my work, and I'll be later talking about this image. It is indeed one of my favorites. So that's why it's a part of the poster as well. So yeah, I had written few slides for my PPT, so I'll run through the material. Um, so this research aims to examine the various forms of memory making through which displaced communities from Pakistan administered Jammu and Kashmir assert their identity. Even 73 years after the region under consideration came to be administered from Pakistan, the Indian state's reluctance to recognize it as such has resulted in the non recognition of the displaced community's status as refugees. In such instances, material objects and tangible memories of displaced persons become pivotal to trace their respective histories and recreate a sense of belonging to the otherwise politically suspended status as IDP. Thus, visual material in the form of family photographs and material objects becomes extremely vital in such scenarios of ambiguities and identity formation of displaced people. Keeping this in mind, the research intends to look at the relationship between that which is memorialized and that which is silenced with respect to 1947, and how the local maps, cultural objects, commemorative sites articulate the silences in their own ways. In the grand narrative of the partition, the internal displacement and community's memory did not receive the desired attention. This work attempts to bring those mnemonic stories, sites, and objects to recreate the memories of the past. Thus, in the context of displaced communities, this research aims to explore through visual and material culture the connections between the past and the negotiations in the contemporary moment through processes of narration, remembering, forgetting, and mourning. So this is my main methodology, and each chapter actually looks at different kind of methodological frameworks and pedagogies. So I look at ethnographical and anthropological methods, oral histories in oral photographic method, and my fieldwork is the primary documentation of personal archives of divided families, both in Jammu province and Delhi. And few case studies are also from the UK, which I took interviews on phone, Skype, and emails. And the primary research material involves documents, letters, oral testimonies, local newspapers, regional books, images of artifacts, memoirs, and cartographical representations. So my first chapter is titled Geographical Borders and Cultural Boundaries, and there are sub headings, as you can see. Oh, sorry. So these are the four subheadings: geographical borders and cultural boundaries, nation and its imagined geobody, memory map of Mirpur city, and that is Mirpur is one of my key areas where I have focused my research on. And last is reminiscence of a lost geographical site. So these are my research questions. The ramifications of borders and discussions about cartographical anxiety in the context of PAJK, the question of phantom map and memory maps. So memory maps is basically a term which I coined, looking at the image of one of the map, which I'll be also discussing, which was hand drawn by C.P. Gupta from his memory. So this is from the state archives, and as you can see, the belt in the slide on the right is the area which I really look into, the communities which have come from this pocket, Mirpur. So this is the zoomed in map, and it was a much larger area before 1947, before the partition of India happened, and they are the other regions, Kotli, Mangla, Jatli, Panjeri, Bhimber, and Manpur. So a lot of these people actually relocated to the other side of J&K, Delhi, and other states as well, especially the northern part of India. So this is Mirpur city before 1947. This is from a private collection. And this is now after. So what happened with the city is it's under a dam was built, and when people migrated in 1947, the whole city became submerged in water. So these are remnants of one of the forts, which is it's known as the Mangla Fort. So actually, it's like permanent exile. So you can't actually visit your ancestors' land. So I also draw a comparison with Jews, and because it's also if you see the timeline, it's 1947 is when the Holocaust as well happened. So yes, these. So this, if you see the red border, so actually this is not a part of India. So I actually talk about the cartographical anxiety, and there's one scholar, Sumati Ramaswamy, which in detail she talks about the geobody and the concept of Bharat Mata. So it is also, if we declare that this part, as you see the red marking, it is not a part of India anymore, but in the popular imagination it still is, and in the law as well, we say it's POK, Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So yeah. So this is the memory map which I'm going to discuss. This is hand drawn by the first generation person, CP Gupta, who came to Jammu and started his life from scratch. So the map is quite unlike the official prototype of a map, which is codified and defined within a system of interpretation in which various signs and symbols present signify a standardized meaning, which would be more or less similar in any official reproduction of a geographical space. C.P. Gupta's memory map is the testimony of a counter geography and counter cartography. These mental maps that are seen in a constant dialogical conversation with both the creator and the community for which they are being produced often become a part of the next generation's. C.P. Gupta's memory map finds resonance in the popular memory of the Jammu region. The map is not only a reproduction of a bygone past, but it is a tangible memory that resonates with many first generation survivors belonging to Mirpur region. The reproduction of the map, along with perhaps a half-page article in a daily newspaper, rescues the memory of Mirpur from the abyss of being forgotten. The memory map thus becomes a living testimony of a ghost city, as in a city that no longer exists on the geographical landscape of either Pakistan or India. So yeah, this is actually reproduced. As you can see, these are images from the daily newspaper. Every year when they, it is in November, one date is designated for the commemoration of the people who had died in the carnage. And so this memory map is basically, it forms the popular memory or the public memory, and it is reprinted each year. So these are claim files. So I'll not go into it. I'll maybe later I can discuss about it. Now I'll go to my second chapter, which is on photography and memory, displaced communities post 1947. And these are the subheadings and subsections of this chapter. Narrativization of family albums. So family albums are very rare, especially these when these families they traveled on foot. So hardly they said that we were just wearing the clothes we were in. So photographs, it's a matter of luxury. And there were few families like Kotli, sorry, in Kotli that who were they were, the army trucks came and they were rescued, so they could carry few utilitarian objects or valuables and few photographs with them. So, and I mainly my archive is built on the photographs that they took. So there is a mediation through these photographs and the memories of the past. So yeah, moving on to my research question. So this chapter seeks how photographs as social biographies. So here I borrow from the works of Elizabeth Edwards and Martha Langford, and it elaborates on the oral photographic method of Lucia Pizzarini to understand the currency of a photograph. This chapter relies on the works of Aurelia Azoulay and Christopher Pinney to interrogate family photographs. So this is one rarest of rare album that I came across, and this is from the personal collection of KL Balgotra, who I think is no more now, and he stays in Delhi. So this is, this is also the Birla temple was also one of the historic monuments of Delhi, and many families got themselves photographed in front of the building, and it's actually talks about how they build up. And as you see that the next photograph is of the same person who talk, he completed his education, his siblings completed, and how they actually were penniless and how they built. And I think this actually resonates with majority of the partition survivors of 1947, whether they went to Punjab or they were from Punjab, West or East Punjab or Bangladesh. So yeah, so a lot of these building up, and these photographs actually are the proof of the journey the families they led. And and I also draw a comparison with Arila Azole's argument, which she talks in The Civil Contract of Photography. And she talks about deterritorializing citizenship. And a parallel can be drawn between the rights that are given to the people who are recognized as state subject of Jammu and Kashmir and those who do not have this position despite belonging to the extended areas of the state, now under PAJK. Drawing upon Azole, one can infer that the state re-territorializes citizenship, wherein state protection and facilities are provided to those who are declared as citizens, and discrimination results against the non-citizens who occupy the same territory and are ruled by the same power. In Jammu, such examples can be witnessed on the outskirts of the city, in the informal settlements of Arispura, Symbol, when new migrants to the city have conglomerated. So and also these people, they the I think one of the focus in my thesis, the argument which I talk about is their recognition. So they do not come under the international laws of internally displaced people. They do not come under refugee because they are internally displaced within a state, Jammu and Kashmir, pre and post partition. So they do not enjoy the rights which many of the West Pakistan refugees enjoy, or the term refugee, what all it entails. So this is also a very, very ambiguous kind of status they are still living in. So these are other photographs. This is one photographic portrait of one of the first generation survivor who is now a very famous doctor of Jammu region. And yes, this album is also one of the rare albums which I, got from a person called Zulfikar. He is now settled in Birmingham with his family. And why it is so rare is because, as you see in the photograph, the mother was a Hindu woman. And during the repatriation act, she was asked to return, and then she was, given, and she was left behind in the Pakistan administered region. And then a Muslim man married her, and then she had a family. And during the Repatriation Act, the government asked her to return, but she didn't want to go back to the family and reconvert to Hinduism. She was happy with the family, but women had no agency. And that's a story which runs across so many popular cinema movies like Pinjar, Gadar, and so many others that actually visually represent the atrocities women had to go through. And a lot of scholars like Gary Carruth, Veena Das, Urvashi Butalia, would actually talk about women's body as sites of violence. So her subject is rare, very rare, because most of the families didn't want to talk about their daughters or wives who were left behind or they converted to other religion. But he was very, very kind to share his family albums, letters, and he literally broke down on phone while he was revisiting those memories of his mother. So yes, so then she came to London, and lot of migration happened in this part of London before 1947 from POK and that the whole belt where people used to come, in ships. So yeah, so they migrated to London, and obviously she didn't want to be the property of either this both the governments, and she just left. She fled from POK to London, and yeah, this is her youngest daughter, and Zulfikar now, who himself is 70 plus years old. So these are the passport size photographs. And I also talk in detail about the identity photographs in the chapters. So this is again a photograph of a daughter who could not meet with her Hindu mother, and the Hindu mother actually left her children. She was married in POK to a Muslim man, and then during the Repatriation Act, she came back to India, and her parents got her remarried again. So she had to leave her family behind. So these are the person in the center is the daughter of the deceased repatriated woman, and this is his son to the left. But unfortunately, she could not meet, and that the person on the right, sorry, is the one who actually visited Mirpur city. So yeah, these are part of other family albums, and I talk in detail in my chapter. So yeah, so I'm trying to quickly cover all my four chapters, so that's why I'm just taking you through a little hurriedly. So this is my third chapter called Everyday Objects and Memory. So herein it has, as you can see, mourning loss through evocative object, valor on record, collecting war memorabilia, objects of survival and livelihood, and objects of desire. Sorry. So, so this chapter is basically I borrow this term called, I've not written it here, but I can speak about it. It's called singularization, which is from the work of Igor Kopytov, and his argument has actually helped me to understand as to how a mundane object transforms into an affective object. According to Kopytov's argument, these objects cannot be understood from one single point in their existence. They may appear mundane until their context is shown as intersecting with a particularly significant moment in the person's history. For instance, the stopwatch that was gifted to Mr. Yuvraj Gupta, who is one of my case studies, in the 1940s by his deceased school teacher, or the aluminium trunk that I'll be discussing, belonging to late Kiran Kaur, now in the custody of a great grandchildren. In both of these instances, the objects are embedded with affective value. So, what I actually look at the mundane objects, which might be a trunk, a stopwatch, a brass glass, any utilitarian object, how it rises from being mundane to becoming a souvenir or a biographical object or an evocative object which is embedded with the memories of the past. So it is one of my this research, I think I somewhere it has succeeded in resurrecting those embedded memories of the traumatic past, which many people didn't even talk in their own families for the last 7 decades. But these objects held in the process of narrativization and reconciliation with those painful memories. So this trunk I discussed at length in one of my chapters. This basically belonged to the deceased Kartar Kaur, who was first generation survivor, and these objects are very, very, carefully preserved by the third generation. So these are the contents of the box, and one great grandchild has one, object. The other has like this, the tiffin, the Dalmia toffee box, and with the contents which are very mundane, like shells, stones, little insignias. So that still a needle, thread. So yeah, I talk at length in one of my chapters, and these are war items of you know, war memorabilia. As we know that a lot of Indians and people from the subcontinent were recruited in British Army during World War II. So these are letters and war medals of people who fought in those wars. So this is one interesting case study of this 96-year-old person who, with lot of chivalry and that very chivalrous posture, he showed me this sword that was basically gifted to him by his father, before 1947, and from Gujranwala, which he carried, and he actually killed people when he was escaping the massacre with his swords. And this brass glass, which is actually very carefully, he kept in one of his treasure boxes, and he showed me. He was reluctant in the first two visits, but then on persuaded by his grandchild, he showed me this box. So, sorry, the glass. And these are images of, you know, other utensils. And also, sorry, going back to this slide, this person, he was relaxed. So see how object basically help in unraveling. So the whole story began with this glass as the epicenter, and it he beautifully narrated the whole episode of escaping the massacre, and what it actually connects. The object becomes the mediator between the memories and connecting them to the present. So these people were from Kotli, so they could manage a lot of stuff, to get a lot of utilitarian stuff from there to this part of the state. See, object of desire is one of my subheadings, where I talk about the jewelry of people who could, because most of them actually sold off their jewelry to just meet day's end. So, yeah, so I also feel that such objects act as a validation of a personal narrative. Their signification is transformed from objects to souvenirs that stand as testimony to the speaker's narrative. They also help the speaker to make a personal selection of the moments that he or she wishes to recall. Therefore, in case of displaced people, such oral narratives, when connected to the raw material of objects, perform the work of relaying memory through time. So, yeah. And this is my next chapter, modes of identity formations and commemorative practices. And I'll quickly go through the subheadings. And yeah. So basically, I talk about the commemorative spaces, monuments, and sites in this chapter. And and also the attachment which people have with the landscape. So, the attachment with landscape and association with spaces becomes a part of people's identity. In the case of displaced people, the memories of a lost space are preserved in their knowledge of the lost place and through the oral transmission of its memory, or through cultural practices that help them to recreate the past in a new space. So these are my research questions, and there are various frameworks that I follow, and I also talk about the shrines, which I talk about in one of my subsections. And I think I'll not read the whole thing, but there are many scholars from whose work I have borrowed, and then I have, made my own argument through this particular community, like Christopher Penny, Dennis E. Cosgrove, Brian Osborne, Eric Mooney. And one significant research work which I could do and complete during my field work was the connection of and the emergence of the cult of Shitla Devi, and how she was reimagined beyond her role as a protector from disease to give succor to survivors of displacement and genocide. How does the community reimagine Shitla Devi in a new context and new geographical location? Broadly, this chapter attempts to understand the processes of identity formation through the negotiations of different agencies, and how, in the domestic shrines, when they are one shrine which was they left behind, like obviously they could not revisit, and it goes under the water, and I'll show the image, and how these 21st century reproduction of this cult deity in calendar images and single folio images for picture frames becomes a focal point for collective memory of the whole community. So this is one of my favorite pictures, and this is that temple which you see on the left, and there is a mosque which actually goes under the water when the Mangla Dam river water is high, and this is a present day photograph when the level goes down for 3 months, so people actually go there and visit both the shrines, like the mosque and the Hindu temple. So this is the temple, and I discussed at length about this temple. So yeah, so this is the reproduction of the temple, which has now entered the domestic shrines of the community living across India. So this is an image from, as we say, a domestic shrine. Almost every Hindu family has a domestic shrine, and this photograph, as you can see in the center, is of the temple. So there is kind of a present day connection with the relics of the past. So this is the Kul Mela. Mela is more of a congregational space, and it's kind of an annual thing which happens each year in Jammu. And people from various states, they come here, and they visit this shrine. And yeah. So quickly, I think I'm a little overshot with time, but I'll just quickly run through the last slides. So the Mirpuri, so also the name toponyms, I talk about that in one of the subsections. And this is the last images from my personal, like my father's collection, and this is my father's aunt, and she was my great aunt, and I think that is one question which I was also jostling personally. So, as a researcher, I feel that it becomes difficult to pose questions or rescue one's own familial memories. In a situation where a subject becomes the interviewee, it becomes difficult to trade positions in an objective manner. A researcher no longer remains the researcher, but constantly oscillates between the two positions. Though I have rarely encountered first generation survivors from PHAK in my immediate family, nonetheless, their memories keep being resurrected in family conversations. Memories which are deeply rooted in a happy location now turned into a ghost city. The third generation inevitably becomes the carriers of intergenerational memories. These memories that have been anchored since childhood create a strong sense of collective identity and belonging. So, yeah. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that the ethnographical and anthropological methods that I have adopted during the course of my research have helped me to bring forth the social and cultural dimensions to the otherwise invisible lives of the displaced communities. I feel this research makes an intervention in the meta-narrative of partition studies. I hope this research will open a new dialogical space for a reader to see material objects, images, and visual histories of displaced communities in a new light. The role visual and object biographies play in unearthing new histories and alternative narratives of displacement cannot be underestimated. During the journey of reading and writing, I have somewhere myself come to a better understanding of the multiple layers that are hidden and coexist within the larger fabric of oral narratives, tangible material, cultural artifacts, and the variegated technologies of memory. So thank you all for patiently listening.